Hi everyone, my name's Jordan and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to do a video that I think will be very fun. I am a huge D&D nerd. About 4 years ago, I got into a podcast called The Adventure Zone, which is a D&D actual play podcast hosted by the McElroy brothers and their dad. If you've ever heard of My Brother, and Me, it's those brothers. So I got into this podcast, and the first campaign they play is one of the best pieces of storytelling out of any media I've ever experienced. And it got me interested in D&D. However, I never had a group of people to play it with. So in 2019, I went to a live show of The Adventure Zone by myself and sat next to these two people that quickly became my best friends. We talk almost every day now, and we plan trips to visit each other because none of us live in the same state, and they're amazing. So we started playing D&D together along with two people that I knew from college, and together we all play this game that's been going on for like 2 years. Since then, I've joined a few other games. I run a booktuber D&D that we're kind of trying out right now, and it's just been a lot of fun. I love D&D. It's a huge part of my life, and it's honestly helped me open up more as a person. I could go on forever about the importance of D&D to me in my life, but I wanted to do a video that was books that feel like D&D. If you're into D&D or you've thought about getting into D&D, I've created this list of books that to me feel like a D&D campaign. A little bit of cheating with the first one, the Adventure Zone graphic novels. This is the podcast I was talking about. Their first campaign, which is called Balance, they are doing a graphic novel for each arc of the campaign. So far there are 4 out, and this is the first one, Here There Be Gerblins. This podcast is just so funny, so fun, and as you get further on it gets very touching, and by the end you'll cry. But this is the first graphic novel adaptation, so a little bit of cheating, but it's very fun. Carrie Peach is the artist, and she is so talented. It's incredible. Everyone should listen to this podcast, but if you don't have the time to commit to said podcast, the graphic novel adaptations are very fun and very quick reads, so I highly recommend. I will say, if you go into these without having listened, you may miss out on some of the humor, but the story is still there, still very fun, and it's literally based on a D&D game, so feels very D&D. Next up, I have Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This is a book I recently read that it just feels so D&D. Quick little side story. In that D&D game I talked about with the two people I met at the live show, we are currently in our campaign working on like saving the multiverse essentially. However, we ended up in this town and it was like in the middle of a tundra. They didn't have a lot of resources and they've never made fish and chips before. So we spent a couple sessions just trying to make them fish and chips and teach them how to make it. So this book feels so much like a D&D side quest. This is about a orc woman who decides to give up the battling life and open a coffee shop in a small town. And with the help of some new friends, she opens this coffee shop and discovers like a tranquil life. And it is just such a lovely book. There's not high stakes. It's just so fun. And to me, this felt like such a side quest that you go on in D&D. Anyone that's played D&D knows what I'm talking about, where you have this goal, but then you find this other side thing you want to do, and you spend all this time doing it. The amount of times we've made our DM come up with new vendors for us to go shopping at is so high. So I highly recommend this book if you're into D&D, or if you want to get into D&D, or if you just want a low-stakes fantasy story that is just so touching. This is perfect. Next up, a less lighthearted read, that is The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. This is a Norse-inspired mythology story that has gods and dragons and like there's a lot of fighting, and it just felt very D&D. A lot of the D&D classes really felt represented in this book, and there's like mythical creatures, there's the idea of gods and traveling and adventuring and clans, and it just, the whole thing feels very D&D. The whole time I was reading it, I was like, this feels like a D&D campaign. It's got a lot of combat, it's got magic, it's got mythical creatures. It's all there. It's all there. I definitely recommend this book. This series has a lot of like revenge plots, and it has a lot of plots about family and found family, and it's just a masterfully crafted story, and John Gwynne is a top tier author. So read this book if you haven't. Next up, a book that is very different from The Shadow of the Gods, and that is Gideon the Ninth by Tam Samir. I talk about this book like as much as I can because I'm just trying to get more people to read this series. This series is phenomenal, but it also feels very D&D in a different way than Shadow of the Gods does. So this, to me, felt very like funny and stuff, because like I feel like when you're playing D&D with a group of friends, you end up making a lot of like dumb jokes and stuff, and this is full of dumb jokes. But also it always makes me think D&D because I have a D&D character that is essentially Gideon. She is a beefcake that swings a cool sword, and that's Gideon. So I always think of D&D when I'm reading this book and the second one. However, this also deals with like a lot of different groups. It deals with found family. It deals with, there's also like a lot of combat. There's gods. There's necromancy, which it's just, it feels very D&D. It feels like something me and my group would do, like this whole story. A lot of the magic is not very similar to D&D magic, but I just felt like the dialogue and characters and the plot all feel like a very well-crafted D&D campaign. This is a sci-fantasy story that follows Gideon, who lives on the ninth house, which is a planet, and there are 8 houses ahead of that. And Harrow is basically the heir to the ninth house, and she is called upon to try to be a lictor, and she chooses Gideon as her cavalier. They all travel to the first house and basically have to do this competition to see who can become a lictor, which is basically like a somebody that fights along with God to defeat the big bad. So this book is just phenomenal, and the second book is one of the best books I've ever read. Nona the Ninth comes out in September, and I am salivating for it. I am just so excited. So highly recommend this book. Got some D&D vibes. It's great. Next up, I have Age of Myth by Michael J. Sullivan. This, to me, the whole time I read it, it's got 6 books. It is a prequel, super prequel series to the Reria Revelations and the Frey Chronicles. The whole time I was reading it felt so D&D. It's like, it feels very medieval, but it also has different like fantasy races like in D&D. It's got elves, it's got dwarves, it's got humans, like it's got all of these different fantasy races, and they go on these fantasy adventures. There's magical creatures, there's dragons. Like, it is just such a cool series, and it feels so D&D. And it's got some of the most well-crafted characters I've ever read in fiction, and I'm so excited to read more of Michael J. Sullivan's books because he knows how to make characters feel so lovely, so real. I felt so connected to all these characters. I highly recommend this series. The basic premise of this series is that there are a group of humans that basically believe that the Frey, which are elves, are gods because they are unkillable. They see them as like immortal beings. But one day a human kills a Frey, and it kind of starts this whole like battle between humans and Frey, and there's some dwarves that get roped in, and there's dragons. They go to different realms. Like, it is such a cool series, and it feels very D&D, so I definitely recommend this series if you haven't read it. Next up, I have one that some people may not expect to be on this list because it's not it doesn't like scream D&D, and that is the Stormlight Archive. This is the second one because a friend is borrowing the first, but the Stormlight Archive has to me, a lot of like D&D vibes. There's, again, different fantasy races that maybe are not exactly like what you see in D&D, but it has different fantasy races. It has like a war between them. And there's like magical weapons, and there's different political intrigue going on, and there's a group of people that basically go out and try to like save the world. It just all feels very D&D. There's like a rich lore backstory that I think really feels indicative of D&D. Like if you want, you can read like the player's handbook, and there's also like D&D novels that basically explain the entire lore of D&D, and a lot of the lore of the Cosmere and the Stormlight Archive specifically feel like they have that rich lore, that rich backstory that really informs the current story, and to me that felt very D&D as well. You've heard of the Stormlight Archive. If you're on my channel, you're probably a fantasy reader, so you've heard of the Stormlight Archive. Very good series. There are 4 out. The 5th one I think was just delayed, but there's the 4 books coming out next year that I'm so excited for that are Cosmere related. They're not in the Stormlight Archive, but they are in the Cosmere, so excited for that. I highly recommend the Stormlight Archive and Brandon Sanderson in general. I understand he's not for everyone. There are some people that really don't think his books are that good, and his prose is definitely not the highest. It's not the best prose you've ever read, but the story and the characters are so lovely, so highly recommend. Last but not least, I have the Gentleman Bastard series by Scott Lynch. This one is the first. It's the Lies of Loch Lamora, and this to me feels very D&D to the point where I want to create a short campaign homebrew that is based on this series, because I think it would be so fun. These stories are about a group of orphans that are taken in to train to be like master con artists and thieves. There's magic, there's like sorcerers, there's heists constantly, like each book has a big heist that they're focused on, and there's these wonderful character relationships. The relationship between Loch and Jean is one of the best friendships in fantasy, and Scott Lynch recently came out and said that he is ready to continue. This is one of those series that has been on hold indefinitely because Scott Lynch was going through some mental health issues, and he has recently come out and said that he is ready to continue on with this series, and I think he's going to start by releasing a novella or maybe a few novellas before releasing the 4th book in the Gentleman Bastard series, and I could not be happier because this is one of my favorite series of all time. All of the heists just feel very D&D, and the way that they have like a group of people that have to go and travel and do these things together. There's essentially bards, and there's sorcerers, and there's magic, and there's just this rich tapestry that upon which all of the characters are set in this wonderful setting. Each book has kind of a different setting. This first one feels like Venice, Italy. The second one is like based on a pirate ship, and it's all just like such a good story. And the whole time I was reading it, I was like, this would be such a dope D&D campaign. So one day when I have time, which who knows when that'll be, I want to create a D&D campaign based off this series for a group of my more non-reader friends, so that they don't see how much I pull from it. But I think playing this story as a D&D campaign would be so fun. Anyway, highly recommend this series if you haven't read it. They are so good. And that is my list of books that feel like D&D. Again, D&D is like one of the most important parts of my life. I play pretty frequently, and every time I have a D&D session coming up, it makes my day. It is such a good way to get to know people and such a good way to explore friendships. Honestly, this booktube would probably not exist if it weren't for that main D&D game I was talking about, because that group of people has really helped me open up and be more and put myself out there more. I'm very introverted, and they have really helped me open up, and without them this channel would not exist. So shout out to my D&D group, Matthew, Anthony, Sarah, and Emily. You guys are why this channel exists, and I love you all very much. Thank you all for watching. This video was a blast and got a little more sentimental than I expected, but hey, here we are. What kind of nerd would I be if I didn't get sentimental about D&D? Like, come on. Thank you guys for watching. Please comment down below. Let me know if you've ever played D&D, and if you have, drop some other books that you think feel very very much so like D&D. If you haven't played D&D, DM me and I will help you get started, because I promise D&D is so fun. And if you read fantasy books, like, D&D is basically getting to be in your own fantasy book. So it's incredible, and you can make it whatever you want. So highly recommend playing D&D at some point in your life. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you really like my content, hit the notification bell to be notified every time I post new videos. Thank you guys for watching. As always, your support means the world to me, and until next time, thanks guys.